Hello all, this is a mini lecture on hallucinogens, and this is an introduction to the various compounds included in this category of drug. So we'll start generally. Hallucinogens are really any drug that changes a person's thoughts, their moods, or their perceptions. And sometimes these are called psychedelics, which would literally translate into like a mind expanding drug. So it causes these distortions in the human subjective experience around thinking, around feeling, and around sensing the world. Nearly all drugs that fall into this category are Schedule 1 drugs, except for ketamine and DXM, which we'll talk about later. Um, there are three broad groups here. So there are a lot of substances that fall into this category. So it's important to keep track and stay organized. And I tried to present this information as systematically as possible. The first group of hallucinogens are called classic hallucinogens, and these are hallucinogens that mimic the serotonin molecule in the brain. And hallucinogens that fall into the classic category would be LSD and psilocybin, two of the most well-known ones, as well as DMT, peyote, and ayahuasca. And we'll talk about each of those individually in a moment. There's another group of hallucinogens called dissociative anesthetics. And this really is anesthetic means pain killing, and dissociative means like a disconnectedness from reality. And the two hallucinogens that fall under this category are PCP and ketamine. And then there are also a group called the belladonna alkaloids, or they're called anticholinergic, which is more of the neurological neuroscience language for these substances, which are derived from the ginseng weed and nightshade plants. Then there are two kind of standalone hallucinogens that we'll talk about that don't fall into one of these three groups. That would be DXM, or dextromorphan, which is found in cough syrup, and salvia divinorum, which is actually still a legal substance that originated, I believe, in South America. It's either Latin or South America. I do want to make a note that this category is kind of loose. So the definition really is just that it changes a person's thoughts, moods, and perceptions, which is like, well, most drugs do that. So what counts and what falls into the hallucinogens category is really up to the person who is making that call. And so sometimes MDMA and marijuana are included as hallucinogens because of some of their more psychedelic properties, or this idea of altered perceptions. But for our purposes, we're going to focus on these three groups as well as DXM and salvia for this module. So I'll talk about a few of these individually. So beginning with the classic hallucinogens, we'll start with LSD, which is lysergic acid diethylmide. This is an odorless, colorless, tasteless substance that is very, very potent. The doses at which you start to experience hallucinogenic effects are incredibly small. We're talking about micrograms. But it is mostly a non-toxic substance on its own. It's the most commonly used and most well-known of the hallucinogens. So among people who are taking hallucinogens, LSD is the most common among them. Um, it is synthesized in a laboratory. It is a fully synthetic chemical, but it does have plant-based forms that have been around for thousands of years. And there's a video I posted that's got some of that history there. But it was discovered, the hallucinogenic effects of the chemical compound was discovered by accident by this guy, Albert Hoffman, in Sweden. He was studying, I think, uterine contractions, and he a drop of LSD accidentally got on his hand, and he didn't start to feel so good and decided to go home and rode his bike home, and along the way experienced hallucinations, and it sounds like they were really scary for him. But then he attributed this to the compound he was studying and spent the rest of his life studying hallucinogenics. Um, LSD has a very complex and very interesting history in the US that involves the CIA and involves psychiatry, Harvard University, 1960s counterculture, acid rock music. I mean, it is just a really interesting cultural phenomenon. And there's a book called Acid Dreams that I would recommend if you're interested in some of that. The fact that it was colorless and odorless and tasteless meant that people could sneak LSD into someone's drink fairly easily and undetected. And so this was of interest to the CIA, who thought it might be a truth serum. It was interesting to people who really enjoyed the mind expanding properties and thought that it would be a way to kind of awaken this revolution in the United States. And so this 1960s counterculture people were dosing people. I mean, it's really complex and kind of far out history. So I would check it out. Psilocybin is the second most commonly used hallucinogen of all of the people who do use hallucinogens. It's the runner-up to LSD. It's a compound found in some mushrooms, and the person either eats dried mushrooms or it's isolated from the mushrooms in like a crystalline form. Um, Psychedelic mushrooms have an ancient history of ritual use in both Mexico and in Central America. And it's a sort of spiritual experience in some cultures for a very long time. Right now, psilocybin is currently being investigated for its potential therapeutic use in psychiatry. So, actually, in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins University, they're doing some research into psilocybin for addiction, curing addictive disorders, for PTSD, for depression, for use with people who are facing terminal illnesses. So, it's experiencing somewhat of a renaissance in terms of its potential therapeutic use. Other classic hallucinogens include DMT, mescaline, and ayahuasca. So DMT, dimethyltryptamine, is also called the businessman special. It's a shorter acting and more intense hallucinogenic experience that lasts for about an hour. And so it's called businessman special because it could, I guess, occur over your lunch break. Um, this is a really powerful substance that was synthesized from a South American plant. And the experiences that we'll talk about what the acute effects of these are in a moment, but it's really similar to LSD and psilocybin. Peyote is a plant. Mescaline is a substance that's found in peyote, and that's a hallucinogenic compound. Another one that has ancient history in indigenous communities in Mexico, and then some in North America more recently. Interestingly, about this substance, the structure is more similar to amphetamine, but the user experiences it more like a hallucinogen or like an LSD experience. So it's an interesting substance there. And then ayahuasca is the plant version of DMT, which I mentioned a moment ago. And this is a substance that is very much not used recreationally, almost exclusively used ceremonially or in like a spiritual context, because it does tend to come with some pretty nasty acute side effects prior to the onset of hallucinations, which we'll talk about in another mini lecture. Dissociative anesthetics, this is PCP and ketamine. So these are a different class. They are hallucinogenic in that they produce distortions of time and mood and thought and sensations, but they do not work the same way as the classic hallucinogens. So PCP, or phenylcyclidine, is a general anesthetic, meaning it has some pain numbing qualities. That's taken orally. It can be snorted, it can be smoked, it can be injected. So it's a very versatile substance there's actually over 120 different types of PCP, and some PCP can be sprayed in its liquid form, sprayed on tobacco or marijuana. Then the leaves are dried and then smoked. This is also called wet. So but that's just one example. It's one of the more common PCP forms, but there are over, like I said, over 120 different types of PCP. Um, and ketamine is a veterinary anesthetic, so it was like a horse tranquilizer and, well, not tranquilizer, horse pain reliever. And both PCP and ketamine have been used in historically in surgery, particularly in like field surgery, where it's like it needs to happen like right now. And ketamine will just kind of it'll numb the pain and kind of knock the person out at the same time. Um, Ketamine can be snorted or injected, and it's actually, interestingly, currently being investigated for treatment-resistant depression. So there's some Canvas videos that I uploaded for more information about ketamine's potential therapeutic use. And then the other hallucinogens. So we have the belladonna alkaloids, which are the ginsenweed derived compounds. So these are plant-based substances. And these also have a really interesting and complex history. Belladonna is, I think it's Italian, um, and it means beautiful something. Forgive me, I don't remember what what means, but it was used in makeup because it created this. When someone ingested the substance, their pupils dilated, and so they used it to make their eyes appear like bigger, and people thought that that was more attractive. But it was also like an intoxicating substance that these people were using to make their eyes look cool, they thought. Um, and then also, there people using belladonna is associated with the history of the image of witches riding on broomsticks. So either people hallucinating that witches were riding on broomsticks, but also there's some evidence that there were women who would use belladonna and apply the substance vaginally in order to absorb it through the skin, and sometimes doing so on the handle of a broomstick. So really complex, really interesting history that I won't go into, but if you're more interested in that, there's more in the book. You can look some up, the history through some sources on the internet, I'm sure. DXM, dextromorphan, this is the active ingredient in over-the-counter cough syrup, and at low doses, which is like what's found in cough syrup, it's just a cough suppressant. But at high doses, it has a dissociative effect. The trouble is that this is not an isolated compound, and so people who are drinking cough syrup at the high enough levels to get a dissociative effect from DXM are also ingesting the other ingredients in cough syrup at a really high level, which actually can be very toxic to the body. Things like acetaminophen or nasal decongestants, just other active ingredients in cough syrup that, in order to get the DXM high, you have to take it at a level where those other drugs are doing a lot of damage to your liver. It's like really bad news that the use of cough syrup in that way. And then Salvia divinorum. This is a legally ambiguous substance, so more recently it's being more regulated, but for a while it was really just kind of off the radar of the FDA. And so it was sold as like a legal alternative to weed or marijuana, which was a really confusing marketing campaign, and people were using the substance expecting it to be similar to their experience with marijuana, but then actually finding out that it had this very strong hallucinogenic effect. And it's a mostly unpleasant or scary kind of intense hallucination and dissociative experience that occurs with the use of salvia. And we'll talk about that later too.